Hi, in this video tutorial we're going to work with Tic Tac Toe. This is part 2 of a game that we're making, and we're trying to incorporate object-oriented design as well as having multiple projects in a single solution with C#. So in the previous lesson, we created a version of our Tic-Tac-Toe app that looks like this. You can play the game where you put in a number, and from 0 to 8, that will indicate a place on the board where you want to place your X. The computer chooses a random number, and then the computer also decides who wins and makes an announcement. In this version of the game, we are going to have multiple projects in one solution. So you can see that the Solution Explorer here shows that we have a console app at the bottom. This is the program.cs file. And then at the top we have a logic project, and the only goal of this is to keep track of all the positions on the board. And so this is a pretty common way to do your design, is you take a class, an object, and you use it to keep the data about the game. And then the other part is to actually print the game. So the object-oriented design is going to look like this. We're going to have a class called board, and we're going to have some properties, or a single property. It's called the board class, and it's going to have a grid. And then we're going to have some methods, some actions, and these will be used to determine if the game is over or if the board is full. So let's start with describing what we have in our code from the previous tutorial. So right here on this first line, we have a variable called board, which is an array of integers, and so that represents all the values of the board. So a 0 means the cell is unoccupied, a value of 1 means player 1 has that square, and a 2 means player 2 has it, which is O's. So the player 1 is X, the computer is O's. Then we initialize the array by setting everything to 0. We set some undefined values for the first turn, and then we go into a while loop. So the while loop will continue until somebody wins the game. And then we're going to ask the player to input a number. Then we're going to ask the computer to invent a random number. And so when both have chosen, we will print the board, and then we will see if anyone wins. So here is some logic that we calculated before, and now we're going to incorporate that into another version of this app. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to create a new project. So we're going to the Solution Explorer on the right here, and right-clicking. I'm going to choose Add, and I'm going to choose a new project. So this will be the library where we can store the data for our app. So you notice here I have library selected from the choices. And I want to choose a, let's see, where's the class library with the .NET framework? This is the one I want. So when this project comes open, you're going to notice here in the Solution Explorer that we now have two solutions. We have Tic Tac Toe, which was what we made before. And now we have this game logic. Inside of this is a class. So this is called class 1. And you can see that it's defined over here. Now I'm going to rename this, and we'll call it board instead. So I'm going to right click and choose rename. And this class is the board. So when I press enter, it's going to refactor it. And the name of the class is listed here, is now board. So the only data that our board is going to have is this array of integers, and I'm going to name it as the grid. So let's do a prop, type tab, and then change this from an integer to an integer array and name it as grid. The next thing I'm going to create is the constructor. So we'll do public and the word board. That's our constructor name. It matches the name of the class. Now the goal of this is when we create a new board, a new instance of the board, we want to have it initialized. Now I'm going to go back to our program and start stealing some code from here. So we have an area where we have something like this. We're going to initialize. So we're not going to need this over here anymore. I'm going to cut it out and then come back to the board class and paste it in. So this is pretty close to what I want to do. Instead of board as I'm going to choose grid as I. And now we have the same kind of logic. So you can see that I'm going to be moving things out of the program file and into this board class. Let's go back to the program file and let's see if there's something else we can change. So we no longer need this line here. This is the array of integers, we're now going to replace that with this board class. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new instance of this board. And I'm going to call this thing game. So we're going to make a new one. Now we have a problem. You can see that we have a red underline. And the red underline is going to tell us that board cannot be found. So you would normally expect to see in the suggestions that we could import it from somewhere. But as you can see here, there are no suggestions for including or importing or whatever the word would be called. This here just says, I don't see any board. Would you like to make a class? Well, I already have a class. Where is it? Why doesn't it see it? Well, the reason it's not visible is because the board class is found in this project called Board Logic, and then the other program is found into the other project. So program is over here. Now, they can't see each other. So what we need to do is create a reference. So let me show you what a reference looks like. I'm going to click on Tic Tac Toe, right click, and choose Add Reference. So when we choose a reference, it's going to bring up the properties and the projects that we can include. We want to include the other project called Board Logic and choose OK. Now, once we have chosen that reference, we should be able to then include the board class in this project. So let's go back and try the suggestions again and see if anything looks different. So sure enough, we have boardlogic.board. Let's try that one. And that seems to work. However, I want to be a little bit more specific. I don't want to have the word board logic around every time. So I'm going to try a different way. I'm going to say, let's try using board logic at the top. So where did that include? Line 1, it looks like. So line 1 says, board logic is now part of your project and board seems to be recognized. So good. Let's save this and let's save the other one. Now let's see what else we can do on our board. I'm going to take out some of these, one of these methods down here. So we have check for winner. I'm going to cut that out and move it over to the board class. So selecting everything from the top to the bottom, and let's go to right click and choose cut. And that is a logic operation. So a logic operation belongs over in the class where the logic is being done. So I'm going to make a few modifications. I'm going to take out this private static and change it to a public. And check for winner is now a valid method. Board at 0 doesn't exist. I've renamed this as grid, so I can retype board to the word grid, and hopefully we see everything working out. So the errors are disappearing. However, this looks kind of like a tedious process. There's a better way, I think. So let's go to the edit menu and do a find and replace, and I want to do a quick replace. In this tiny little spot up here, I'm going to type in the word board, and I'm going to replace it with the word grid. And then the button down at the bottom says replace all. So let's select that. And it looks like 40 occasions were replaced. So now check for winner has been replaced. We've got ourselves a new method. So I think I've created a problem for myself. The word grid up here shouldn't be grid. I'm going to change that back to the word board. And the constructor should also be board. So let's see if I got that right. And so now we've got ourselves the name of the class as board and the name of the property as grid. Let's see, there's another method up here. This one here is called grid logic. That also got named. So I thought I was being smart by doing a quick search and replace for everything, but I replaced a bunch of stuff I shouldn't have. So let's see if that makes everything work. Okay, so I don't have any errors over here. Looks like I've got it named correctly. Let's go back to program and see what else we can move out. So this item here called check for winner, we can delete that and type in the word game and then dot. Check for winner now is a method from the class. And so we're just refactoring here so that way we can move all the logic into the board class. Okay, we've got another issue here. It says game can't be used. What's the matter with it? It says an object reference is required for the non-static method. Okay, so when you're in a console app, variables that are in that app have to be static. So let's just name static, and so that way the error goes away. And so this is now a valid name. Let's see what else we can change. So the word board is no longer in use. Instead, we have the word game.grid, and that is going to work. So do the same here. Okay, scrolling down, it looks like the rest of the game is almost there. So let's change this back to a game.grid. Anything else? I think we've moved most of this out. Okay, print board, we got the same idea. So I moved down through the rest of the class, and everywhere the word board is used, I changed it to game.grid, and it seems like everything's working out. Let's go ahead and see if we can make this run. Let's test it out. So we have an issue here. It says we can't go through the grid and count from 0 to 9. Why not? So we need to define how big our array is. That's the problem. So inside of the constructor, let's say grid equals a new integer array of size 9. Let's see if that makes any difference. So now it looks like it's running. So it says please enter a number. Let's try 4. And the game seems to be working as it did before. Now, before we finish this off, I want to show that there is still an error that we could potentially experience. So let's run the game and see if we can fill up the board and what happens if all of the squares are picked. So I'm going to start the game and make sure that we end in a tie. So I'm going to pick the squares that will lead to a tie. Okay, so you can see that I am down to the last move of the board. There's only one square left. And so I'm going to select position 1. And now the computer will not have any place to pick. And as soon as I choose 1, we go into an infinite loop where the computer is constantly choosing a random square. And of course, there is already a square occupied. So it doesn't work. So we need another method to check to see if the board is full. And of course, if the board is full, then the game is a tie since there's no winner. So to make this happen, let's go into the board class, and I'm going to just increase the code a little bit more. So this should be a pretty simple question to say, are all of the squares occupied? If they are, then return a true value. So let's create a function or a method that has a Boolean return, and we'll name it isBoardFull. We'll assume by starting that the board is full. So I'm going to set a Boolean variable to true. Then I'm going to loop through every square on the board. And so one by one, I'm going to ask a question. Are you empty? If any of them come up as a value of 0, if any of these squares are 0, that means the board is not full. So just one exception will choose the false value, or will make this value false. So if I find any square that has a value of 0 in it, then I can switch the value of isFull from true to false. Finally, at the very end, we just return the value isFull. So this function essentially is searching for the existence of at least one 0 in the entire list. Now there might be more sophisticated ways to program this, but a for loop is easily understood and seems to serve the purpose here. So now I have a method that will tell me if the board is full or not. Let's go and use that now in the game. So I'm switching back into program. So after I choose a square, I'm going to ask a question. Is the board full now? And if so, we'll break out of the loop. So I'll ask this question after the person chooses their square, and then I'll ask the question again after the computer chooses a square. So that way, if either of these is the last one chosen, then the game will break out of the while loop. Lastly, after the while loop is finished, we're going to send a message that tells whether the game is over or not. So since the while loop is finished, we know that either the board is full or somebody won. So let's print off a message that says the game is over, player 1 wins, or player 2 wins. Now the winner is going to be determined by this function called check for winner. So it might say player 0 wins, which essentially means it's a tie. So we could make a little more sophisticated message here instead of saying player 0 wins, but this should work. And then finally we can have a read line, so that way if the program automatically closes quickly, the read line will hold it there on the screen until somebody presses enter. This time I'm going to try to win the game, so let's try it again. Shouldn't be too hard. I'm going to select a diagonal, so I'll go across there, and it says now the game is over and player 1 wins. So it looks to me like I've got myself a condition now that will actually check and not get us into an infinite loop. So in the Windows application, we're going to create another project, and we're going to ignore the console app, but we are going to continue to use the board class. So you're going to see a use of the object in two different projects.